His comments reported today in the Irish Times about inward migration, I think, are deeply inappropriate. For him to come out and say Ireland has had too much migration, it's not just a dog whistle. It's very disturbing rhetoric. We've seen
To
the
parse it,
Taoiseach.
though, it wasn't really too much. It was too much too fast, which is a different thing
but
entirely.
It neglects a couple of key points. One, that we've seen a brutal bombardment of Ukraine by Russia on the border of Europe, and so many Ukrainians who've come here fleeing war, seeking shelter, who've been welcomed by and large by Irish communities. He neglects that. He neglects the fact that communities across the country are crying out for skilled labour in healthcare and hospitals and creches and schools. So to say we've had too much migration too fast, I think misses the point. We don't have the right infrastructure for that, but it's a new low in political rhetoric when we see the Taoiseach appearing to conflate inward migration and homelessness and, may I say, the biggest opposition party, Sinn Féin, taking a tilt against Ukrainians in the Dáil this week. Again, a real new low in political rhetoric from them too.
Over the past few months, we've all said that we want to have a factual discussion on our future migration policy. And we need to be able to do that in a space where we don't allow, indeed, the far right or the far left to pick apart. And let's actually discuss the facts. And I don't think my views on immigration will be questioned. You talk about the need for skilled labour. I issued 31,000 work permits with joy. But two comments there, Ivana, that you made. First, in relation to the Taoiseach's comments, it is just a fact to say that the biggest reason for the last 3 months of people entering homeless is that they're coming out of the direct provision system. That's just
it's not. Neil, that's been actually,
that is
that's
the details
been
that have been given quite clearly.
No. If you look at the nationwide figures, that's not correct. The biggest reason.
But you can't just say it's not a factor.
Well,
and the Taoiseach has to be in a position to lay out all the facts.
Well, can I say this? The biggest factor is the government's failure to build enough homes. I mean, that's so evident.
Ivana, but again, when you look into when it comes to migration, which again, I cannot be more stronger in my view on how good immigration is. I was very lucky to officiate a decision ceremony last week. When you look at, say, asylum seekers, before 2019, we had 3,000 to 5,000 asylum seekers coming a year. 3,000 to 5,000. We'll hit 22,000 this year. That is a lot very suddenly. And that's not down to Irish policies, that's down to the changing nature of Europe and the changing nature of migration practice. We have to be able to say that in saying this, yes, immigration is a good thing from a country, fundamentally a good thing. But we have to say what are the factors that can come in and how it is dealt with. Infrastructure. If you were able to sit here 5 years ago and predict that asylum seekers coming into Ireland would go up 5 times, or indeed that there'd be a war in Ukraine that would lead to in total 110,000 people coming here over the last number of years, well done. We have infrastructure. We're responding in rapid real time.
Neil,
so to say this all should have been 5 years ago is a little bit misleading.
Neil,
but we have to have the ability to talk in facts without somehow everything you say is being labelled as dog whistling. And I really don't think I can ever be accused of dog whistling.
I'm not accusing you of dog whistling.
You just accuse the
Neil.
Taoiseach of dog whistling, and I think it's unfair and inappropriate.
What I'm saying is, I think it's not helpful for political leaders like the Taoiseach, or indeed the former Taoiseach, or indeed the finance spokesperson from the main opposition party, to engage in language that appears to blame migrants for what, let me finish, for what is in fact a deficit in our infrastructure. We haven't built enough homes.
Ivana, I just want to ask you this. It's very simple.
Shortfall, and that's why people are
do the
homeless.
numbers. You expect, based on historical things, about 3,000 people seeking asylum in a given year. Then suddenly you have 22, and it is quite sudden. What are you supposed to have planned, looked into your crystal ball and says it's going to go from 3,000 to 22,000 in jig time?
But Pat, this
No,
is what
you're not
this
doing
is what
that.
governments do. I mean, and in Labour we're constructive in opposition.
Okay, what are you saying then about Lebanon and Gaza, and what would you be planning in the Labour Party for provision for those? Because that's looking at the future.
Do you know what we would do, Pat? And
Yeah?
I've said this, I've put this on the public record. We absolutely support the government's own commissioned expert plan, chaired by Catherine Day, which recommended the introduction of 6 large reception and integration centres, through which those who are seeking refuge, seeking asylum here, can be
No, I'm
accommodated.
just wondering what the Labour
and
Party is
processed.
predicting in terms of asylum seeking over the next 5 years, for example.
First of all, we've absolutely condemned the brutal Israeli bombardment of Gaza and now of Lebanon. And, the reality there is that most people there wish to stay in the region. They don't want to leave their homes.
Yeah.
They don't want to be
But
bombarded.
what is the Labour
I
Party
think the
predicting
Ukrainians,
for migration into Ireland in the next 5 years? Because if you're going to plan for it, you must have an idea as to what
Well,
we
we've
might
absolutely
expect.
supported EU level planning on that. That's one thing. It has to be planned at EU level, but also we do need to see government acting on their own recommendations. And Catherine Day's group looked at this, looked at predictions, Pat, and modelled how you would accommodate up to that level of people coming in seeking refuge in anticipation that there might be wars or conflicts. We've seen the Syria war long before this as well, and of course the Ukraine war. But, the reality again, communities across Ireland have welcomed, have shown really strong integration initiatives for Ukrainians, for those who seek refuge. And the small number of cases where we haven't seen that, where we've seen hostility, are the exceptions.
I suppose the reality is that immigration is going to be a general election issue. So, while you can criticise kind of off the cuff comments, each party is going to have to get a handle on what exactly are they saying during the course of this campaign in terms of numbers, in terms of overall policies, in terms of accommodating people, because that's what people want to know. I know whenever I hear about the 6 large reception centres, nobody ever volunteers where are they going.
Well, actually, in our own constituency, both myself and Councillor Dermot Lacey have pointed out vacant properties that could be used.
Yeah.
And indeed, there are.
Well, juries know
and
not.
indeed, there are quite a number of
Which
bypass
property is
centres.
that?
Bagot Street
Bagot
Hospital.
Street.
And indeed,
Hang on a second. Every single programme where we talk about this, Bagot Street Hospital is the solution that's offered.
Well,
and it could accommodate, at the time it was initially volunteered, it could accommodate 1 week of Ukrainians' arrivals. 1 week, that's all.
Well,
So it's tiny. What you're proposing
Pat,
is tiny.
Look, there are quite a number of IPAS centres, in fact, around the Dublin Bay South constituency. That's very welcome. For Labour, we have published a detailed migration policy. I think the only opposition party to do so. We've modelled it based on the Catherine Day figures. We have to prepare and anticipate, as Fionnan says, that there will be inward migration. I'm the daughter of a family. My grandfather came here from the Czech Republic in the 1940s, and was involved in establishing Waterford Glass, which went on to employ 3,000 people at its height. And there's a plaque to him now in Waterford City Centre. And I think any discussion about immigration, and Neale is right, let's be fact-based, but we have to acknowledge the immense contribution to Irish society that has been made over many years by those who've come here, and indeed the immense contribution Irish people have made to other countries, Australia, America, Britain,
Absolutely.
through emigration.
And Ivana, I think it's important. I couldn't agree with you more. We are a migrant people, inward and outward, but we have to be able to have a discussion about inward migration that isn't just about accommodation numbers. It has to be about the trends. It has to be looking at the EU Migration Pact, and we have to be in a position where we can speak factually about this issue without it generating an emotive response. And this goes particularly to the far right who lace us with conspiracy theories. But equally, if we're be able to say that, well, X amount of people, 67 people entered homelessness last month from the direct provision system, we have to be able to state that simple fact without all of a sudden being portrayed as something that we're not. But the discussion has to go.
That was the point, I think.
The
majority nationally.
He said, but I think this is where we're losing ourselves in semantics. When the actual discussion has to be, of course, accommodation. I agree with you. I actually happened to have been on the board of the Bagot Street Hospital Trust at one stage. It would probably accommodate 260 to 269, which is smaller than any of the IPAS centres currently in my own constituency. It has to go beyond accommodation. Let's look at the trends through Europe. There is a pent-up demand post-COVID. There are serious conflicts on the near borders. We have to look at actually using the full EU Migration Pact. That's why we backed it. That's why we put it to the Dáil vote. And that's why we want to make sure that we work with European countries who, if you look at their average asylum seeker numbers, were much higher than Ireland, but have reduced in the last couple of years.
Fionnan, when you talk about every party having to have a clear migration policy, I mean, when you look to the United States, where migration is big in the presidential election, Donald Trump is very clear. Throw out 25 million people, we'll get rid of them. Clear, that sort of stuff. Those messages are clear. When we're talking about, as Neale and Ivana have been doing, we're talking about subtleties, we're talking about complexities. And they don't play well to, the simplified voter.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the criticism you could attribute to the Taoiseach in his comments is that he passed comments about migrants without context. He didn't contextualise and say, this is one set of figures, here is the wider set of figures. And that's the accusation back against him, is that he was picking on one particular aspect of a problem. Your difficulty over the coming months is going to be, if this conversation doesn't take place in the mainstream, it's going to continue to take place on the margins. And therefore,
so
that's
you
where
need
your
responsible conversations
and
subtleties.
Because that's it. If it's on the public's minds, then they're going to want to hear about it. Where do you stand?
To be fair, I think that's right. And I think, to be fair, Minister Roderick O'Gorman did give a statement in response, and indeed spoke about it again in the Dáil when we talked about it, pointing out that those who are in the international protection system are not eligible for housing assistance payment, HAP in other words, and not eligible for housing supports under the Department of Housing. So I think that's helpful for people to know. I think, if I may say, it's emotive to start using language of the sort that we saw from other quarters. I think this is an issue that needs to be discussed.
If you want to move on
but
to...
it is a bigger issue